And, whether it's, allowing for, and I'm all for religious freedom and yeah, I like church, period. At the same time, it just seems to me from when we start talking about water resources, septic capacities, stormwater runoff, all of these things that can impact the going concerns that are ag. It just seems to me that whether it's outdoor equipment storage or some of these uses that can be pretty disruptive to ag. And again, we've got examples that we've seen that have come before us. I'm not trying to run religious people off. That's not it at all. And I don't know how to couch this without saying that I just think it's worth examining those conditional uses to make sure that this is what we want it to be, because, while we are a pretty rural county, and I think people think of us as relatively, undeveloped, the truth is we are a pretty mature county when it comes to land use, because when you take into account the land that's been zoned for, 75,000 acres that we've put into, ag easement, and then, what has access to water and sewer, we're really limited with what we can do from a growth standpoint. And so some of what I'm saying may fly in the face of growth, and that's not at all what I want to do. What I want to do is have greater predictability in zoning. So, I just wanted, and I think I may have been one of the ones who brought this up, that I would really like to drill down on some of these conditional uses so that, we don't have, or if we do have, a private school come in, it's a very intentional decision that we've made. From a water access, from a sewer access, from a water management standpoint, leaching into the groundwater, things that undesired consequences that we just haven't anticipated correctly. And that's part of it. And I'm does that make sense to anyone? Because again, we've got a lot of conditional uses. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's worth our while to say, it's 2026, we've got churches that are shuttering. If somebody wanted to come in and have a church, they could probably buy an existing church facility pretty cheap right now. We don't have to zone a farm to allow for a church.
Peter, I think I agree with you on a lot of this, because it seems like over the years when we didn't have any other place to put certain conditional uses, it was dumped into the ag zone.
That's right.
And as the years went by, we kept dumping and dumping and dumping until there's conditional uses longer than our arms. So I think, I'm not trying to interpret what you're saying, I'm just agreeing that maybe we better take a look, instead of adding conditional uses in the ag zone, maybe we better take a look at some of them and say, are these really conducive to our concept of the ag zone and the ag zoning? And we're not dumping on churches, but I have over the years, using one as an example, and it was a church that's in the New Windsor Union Bridge area. They basically bought a farm, sold off the lots, which they had every right to do, and they did a great job of clustering those lots the way that should be done. But then the church was basically put in the middle of the remainder of that farm. There is nothing to farm in the ag zone. And I think that bothers me as much as anything, which comes back to what you're saying. And maybe we better take a hard look at some of this stuff.
Janice, what do you got?
Yeah.
I need to get more aggressive. I can see with you guys. So, so what Pete was talking about with resources, with wells and septics, anybody that comes before with a plan, ag or whatever, especially for churches, is going to have health department that kind of rolls that and looks at it all. So I think we're covered there. But I noted the note about private air parks versus public. So there are many private ones around. My husband got his license at Clearview, which is off of Bartholomew Road for flying. And if you can fly there, you can fly anywhere. But there are others that are used for private pilots too, that, Carroll County's become much more popular, and they just prefer to go elsewhere. Also, I would tend to think, coming back from the Eastern Shore, we saw the crop dusters out there. So I'm guessing the crop dusters that service our farms out here don't necessarily come from Carroll County Regional. They probably come off of more of the private ones. So I wouldn't want to see us like pigeonhole just for the Carroll County private airport. I would want to maybe not bring more on, but keep those that are out there.
I'd just say, so not many planes used for crop dusting in Carroll County, just because we're not flat enough. I imagine in the Tawny Town, Gettysburg area, they could. But, I mean,
Into
normally they
the
use
trees.
helicopters or, now
drones.
drones is like the big thing now, but yeah, I mean,
More accurate.
Very cool.
that's definitely something that, there are a lot of small airports around and, private use.
Josh, what are your thoughts on overall conditional uses? I mean, do you think things get kind of lumped together? Or
As
is it
for,
difficult is it difficult to, do we need separation? Do we need different, do we need different groupings in conditional uses, a new subset?
well, for instance, golf courses, you can't just put a golf course on like a small farm. Topography, all those things factor into it. The
How about dog kennels?
wineries, dog kennels.
We're seeing more and more of those
Yeah,
all
more
the
of
time.
them too.
Well, we're gonna see more of them with, the Amish community, they.
You're right.
They
So-
they-
But I mean, should they be in the middle of neighborhoods and things like that? Or do we need anything? and
I
I'm
think
just
that's
picking it out
why
of the sky.
they're in ag,
Yeah.
or proposed. I think they're better suited there than in a neighborhood.
Right, right.
Yeah, because they're very size limited depending on the size of your lot and the setbacks.
Right.
Because we always hear a lot of dog kennels coming through BZA, so.
So just to kind of reinforce the distinction between the permitted and the conditional uses, because I think sometimes there is a misunderstanding that if you make something a conditional use, that it gives the Board of Zoning Appeals the ability to say, yeah, we don't really like that use, so we're going to deny it or something like that. The best way to think about conditional uses is as permitted uses, with the understanding that they get reviewed on a site-by-site basis to determine if there's anything about that particular site that would suggest either it's not an appropriate use or that certain conditions need to be attached to using that site for that particular use. It doesn't give us latitude to just say no to something.
Yeah.
So that's really the best way to think of conditional uses. If you don't want to see them ever anywhere in the ag zone, then you might want to consider making them prohibited. If you think that this use might be okay, generally speaking, but that certain sites may be less desirable for that or less appropriate for that use, and you want to have the extra check on it, then that would be appropriate to say, okay, let's make that a conditional use so that the BZA can have the extra review, extra layer of review. It should never be thought of as something that gives us latitude to decide yes or no, kind of randomly.
Well, there's just the three or four that, conditional uses that I kind of in my head told myself, are we at a point in a county, as a county, where water resources are dear enough that we would like to revisit the nursing homes, churches, schools, and then also, I'll say it, the equipment storage thing concerns me just because of leaching into the soil. And, you know, for our farmers. And then the other part of that is when you have some of these, if you, again, it's mainly water use and septic runoff that I'm concerned about in those four uses. And I wasn't concerned about airports, you know, but somebody, wants to, I frankly thought when I was growing up, based on what scientific, Popular Mechanics was telling me, we'd all be flying to work in our cars at this point. And it looks like they may be coming, but, I don't think so. I'm not, the airports was not one that I was concerned about. It was, those were the four, maybe five that I was, how many did I list? Did I list four? Churches, nursing homes, and again, it's mainly water use and septic. I'm just concerned what impact that has as it leaches into the ground to our farmers. That's the only reason I'm bringing those up. Because, those uses, it seems to me, they ought to be on water and sewer. It just seems like it, and if we want to allow it, then dadgummit as a county, we ought to be running a sewer line out to that piece of property that large school wants to attach into. I don't know, that just, those were the three or four that I just kind of wanted to flag and say, and if we as a commission are good with it, and you as farmers say, yeah, Pete, you're bringing up something you're making an issue out of something that's not really an issue. I'm good to move on. I mean, I'm just asking the question, are we ready, are we ready to, because it was one thing when we were doing it in 1930. I'm asking the question, is it another thing? Is it a thing that we ought to be worried about? Because if you guys tell me it's not a thing, I'm cool. I'm ready to rock. Let's leave it.
I think Ralph's take on it is like, okay, it's a conditional use, but then they ruin the whole parcel while having the conditional use. I mean, if there was some way we could just restrict, say, okay, you can do it, but,
This is how you do it.
yeah, you can't go plop right in the middle.
I mean,
So,
if we require clustering on the homes, and then the rest of the farm then can be destroyed with certain uses, what's the point of the ag zone? And the other thing is, I keep going back to the surveys that you came up with. You went out in the communities, you listed what's important to the people that live and work and commute or work in Carroll County and live here. And one of the main things always was the rural nature of the county. I mean, that's important to the people. I think part of our job here is to protect the will of the people. And by eroding this ag zone over the years, we better take a look at it and see what we can do to stop that erosion. That's my point. You're right, Matt, that's what I'm concerned about.
Okay. So and this boils back to, this goes back to, if we're gonna do it, let's do it right, right?
So I think, I believe nursing homes, what you're referring to more is assisted livings, which they're limited to 16 or can expand to 23, but they have to have commercial kitchens, and there's a whole litany of what they have to have. But I think that I go back to the wells. Wells are in a lot of areas much more productive than they are in some. So I don't think, and the health department is very critical of well capacity. In an assisted living, we have to have 2 wells because, not that they both didn't function well, but in case one went down, the other one had to cross over. So, and septics today are a lot different in how they're designed. You know, some of them, you know, they're not necessarily leaching out into the fields. So I think I'm mixed on the churches simply because we have seen some big ones, and I agree with Ralph. I don't think that they should cluster and then use the balance for something else. If it's ag, the remainder should remain somehow, you know, cluster your church in that other. But I don't think we should arbitrarily just say, no, we can't have it.
So it sounds like there is support for basically reevaluating the allowed uses in the ag zoning district. And I've made a note to especially look at them in terms of how they align the purpose of the zone and the impacts that those uses might have, whether that's water, stormwater, I would throw in traffic generation, those kinds of things, and ensuring that they're not going to undermine the ag viability, ag uses in the area. I also noted that this could include things like, you know, maybe you're looking at size limitations on certain types of uses, or certain, you know, chip generations, if it's traffic is a concern.
I'd say setbacks too.
Yeah, so, and then citing,
I think it's the
we
rough
could
stuff,
look
yeah.
at, for instance, we have rural development standards in our subdivision regulations. We could look at those to see, I can't remember if they only apply to residential uses or all uses, but we could look at incorporating something like that, so that when you get a site plan in, there's something in the subdivision and site development regulations that says these should be placed this way on the site. So a couple of things that we could incorporate into a review of Chapter 158 with respect to ag uses. Are you okay then with sort of grouping all those 3 recommendations together with a recommendation to do that sort of review?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's see how many more we can get through here. The next one relates to Emerging uses, this we might also be able to group under that, that sort of category of reviewing uses in 158. So this is talking about making sure that things that are sort of on the horizon for the ag industry in the future are factored into our allowable uses. So the ones that are specifically noted are hay produce and livestock auctions, animal rendering, composting, and incinerator facilities, food waste composting, feed stores, ag industrial parks, and emerging agricultural businesses, whatever they may be. So making sure that we have flexibility in our zoning ordinance to respond to those changes in the industry, and that they can lend support to the viability of the ag community into the future. So if you're okay with that, I would suggest that we
Yep.
kind of group that into the
Good.
previous discussion.
Yep.
Oh, you're,
Further
if
down.
you go down.
You are
you have
one.
it.
Yeah, next
Oh,
one,
my bad.
next one down.
Sorry.
Next one
I
down,
forgot who
yeah.
was driving this ship.
Right there.
Tiffany does a lot, but she can't extend her arm to grab my mouse. Okay. Now we're on to rural design standards and subdivision controls. So this gets at what I was just mentioning in terms of our subdivision and site design code.
Daphne, I have a
Ma'am.
question on, so what is currently zoned, the one we just talked about? That doesn't affect them, like if they go to sell something? Keeping it there that way?
I believe that this recommendation flowed from a discussion of certain uses that either we don't currently address in our zoning code explicitly, or may be not allowed in our zoning code. So, for instance, the first one, the hay, produce, and livestock auctions. We've had some inquiries about doing produce auctions, and our zoning administrator, because we don't have that listed in our code as an allowed use, our zoning administrator then needs to kind of figure out what the closest use that's described in our code would be. And so it ends up being a livestock auction, which is very different from a produce auction, but we don't address produce auctions. So it's those kinds of things that I think what the discussion related to was, what are some of the uses that are either on the horizon or we know are kind of tricky uses because our zoning code doesn't actually address them fully, and trying to kind of clarify that.
Okay.
So if it's an existing use,
It's a,
then we've somehow already figured out how to address it.
Got it.
And when we go to look at the zoning ordinance, we would try to factor in those kinds of things. Anytime you're changing code, you want to also evaluate the impact on what's already in existence and determine how you want to address that.
got it.
Okay,
Daphne,
so,
Just
yeah.
one question
Sure.
about that. Would you categorize certain events that happen within the ag zone as part of that? In other words, we see more and more, we'll give you an example. Recently, in our area, there was a big event about flowers. Is that included, these events, is that included in that part of the ordinance, or? Because we see more and more of that, flower festivals, different venues that are adding that in the ag zone, and what is that? Is that is that a special permitted use that has a
It kind of
half-life?
yeah, so usually special events require, they fall into a category of like temporary or seasonal events, and they require a temporary zoning certificate that they have to apply for. Depending on the use, they might have specified some of those events as part of their business model or their use. It might be intrinsic to their use. For instance, if you have an agritourism type of,
That's what I'm talking.
Do you mean like the,
Like the Tulip Festival that was just in our area.
okay, but isn't,
Which was a great success, brought a
Yeah.
lot of commerce into
I
our.
don't know I don't know 100%.
berry picking?
Yeah.
Well,
But I
yeah.
would say that you probably need to get a temporary zoning certificate for that event. And depending on where it is, there might be
Yeah,
some other things that you need to
Yeah.
provide in order to be,
Yeah.
Because events,
Granted that.
yeah, events like that, Daphne, you could have 2,000 cars show up, or
yeah.
200. You just don't know.
right,
So they're temporary permits, I guess you say,
mhm,
based on the ability to handle 2,000 cars, or 200
Yeah.
cars, or 2,000 people, or 20 cars. You see what I'm saying? So
sure.
so they're all short-term, temporary events that have a life to them of so long. So like, take it.
Generally speaking, I mean, you might also have something
So
like
that's baked
like a
into our
farmer's
code
market.
already.
You might have something like a farmer's market that happens seasonally from April through October, and they might say, this is our plan. And so they're not necessarily, each time that happens, getting a new zoning certificate. Or it might also be something, so some of the agritourism types of places, if they are conditional uses and they have to go to the BZA to get that conditional use approval, there might be something that's stipulated in their conditional use approval that addresses things like the number of events that they can have. That's kind of also almost like a separate process. And that's meant to also address things like, is this location a good location for those types of events? If it's down a 10-foot wide gravel road that's 5 miles long, that may not be, those kinds of the things get factored in then to that evaluation. But these are all the reasons why you might want to say that a particular use is maybe best suited as a conditional use, because we want to look at the specific site conditions to see, is this capable of handling larger scale events? Is that indeed what you have planned? But those are kind of how those get addressed through our code. And then, of course, if there are a lot of complaints lodged against that particular event, sound is carrying too far, or the traffic is backed up for miles and miles, and this is happening on a weekly basis, or something like that, then that can affect the decision to issue that temporary zoning certificate for the event in the future. So there is a
So
little
we
bit
don't
of
have
checks and
Woodstock,
balances.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and, look, sometimes, it's particularly for seasonal things, sometimes if they're super popular, they might have a temporary effect on traffic, people's ability to move around. I don't know, is that sort of something that we want to say is acceptable on one day a year, because we know it's also generating a lot of good things for kind of spillover effects on the community, business, patronizing businesses, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's see, so these two recommendations in this particular subsection, rural design standards and subdivision controls, are also looking at things like allowable uses and where they might be located on a property. I would almost say that AT4R2 there, maintain and do not increase the allowable number of principal permitted or conditional uses on remaining portions.
Mhm.
That's what I said.
Might be related to the, some of the recommendations that we were just talking about. So AT4R1 is talking about those rural design standards to ensure they're enforced during the subdivision process, specifically limit residential lot sizes and site disturbance to the minimum necessary and require clustering to maximize the remaining land's potential for continued ag production. So you can see some comments there related to trying to better define where some of the shortcomings are perceived to have been. This is part of our code, and I think our development review folks work with the applicants to try to enforce those, or try to achieve those standards. So if there are particular things that we're concerned about, we can try to drill down on those.
A lot of times when we see these subdivisions come in on these types of properties, we're using use in common driveways more times than not. Do we feel as a commission that the design standards that we've been using for those drives is sufficient? Would we like to see those drives widened a little bit?
Yeah. At the least, some widening of the road, I mean.
When they cluster, aren't they limited to a number of what they can cluster to?
On one use in common,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like 5.
I think it's 5.
yeah.
It's 5, yeah.
So,
And
Yep.
then they always come and ask us to do 6.
For another.
7.
Right.
6 or 7, and by the way, we think the road is, a 10-foot road is sufficient because we know each other. Yeah, I just, given that the way we live right now has changed, again, I think that's worth a review and worth a conversation, because, you see Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and everybody's getting deliveries. It just makes sense to me that these use in common drives, we should be expanding them a little bit and holding the line on it when people come and ask for a variance, or an exception, whatever you want to call it, because we're not doing anybody any favors by designing those roads the way we did 20 years ago, because we have changed how we live.
So if I'm understanding the conversation here, the idea is we want to continue to promote clustering in the ag and conservation districts, but we may need to look at things like the standards for the use in common driveways to make sure, since clustering kind of requires a use in common in a lot of cases.
That's right.
But we want to make sure then, if you're having to use that design approach, that the use in common drives are
Sufficient.
sufficient. Gotcha.
And what is that? I mean, again, guys, I'm making this up. I don't know, but we used to design parking spaces that were, at least 8 feet wide. So, if that's the parking space, then are we talking about a 16-foot wide use in common driveway? That sounds pretty wide. Sounds pretty wide.
Till you need emergency vehicles to
It's-
get down.
yeah, and we've been
then-
talking about that too.
Then it gets nasty, and use in common driveways probably are one of the biggest source of conflict you could ever have.
Right.
And I just do not like use in common. Just because grandma used it to haul hay into the farm is not an excuse to allow a use in common driveway. And we've heard those arguments, believe me,
I know, yeah.
See?
and they don't hold water.
Coming behind,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
So I guess I'm looking for some guidance
I was
from
going to talk to you about.
what is, not what's considered
Okay.
normal by engineers in this county. I want to know what's considered sufficient, by modern standards.
I'd like to see 'em out.
Yeah.
So we could do some research and bring back information about a few things. Number one, what do other places do in terms of limiting the number of use in common, the number of homes,
Dwellings.
for instance, off of a use in common? Could be 3, it could be 4, we allow
Could be
5.
none.
Could be none.
Yeah.
What's the length? What's the width? What's the kind of the standard for paving material, that sort of thing?
Right.
Daphne, use in common driveways can be a nightmare for EMT and emergency services, number one. It can be a nightmare for deliveries down use in common. It could be a nightmare for conflict among the people who are supposed to be taking care of the use in common. I would be the first to just recommend that we outlaw them. For all the above reasons.
Yeah, so but then you have the challenge of, if you want to try to cluster, is a use in common going to help you do that better?
Well, you just require clustering. I don't care where it is, you require it. That's supposed to be,
Clustering off of a public road.
well, that's supposed to be part of the ag zone requirements, that we push for clustering. And, other than the off conveyances, you can, and even that, when you, that was supposed to be the hallmark of development in the ag zone, is to cluster and keep the majority of the farm open. And, so, I probably am a lone vote here, but I would love to just look into saying, should we in the future allow use in common driveways for all the reasons I just stated?
Yeah, I think what I
By the way,
was,
you're not the, use in common, flag lots, I think we should be, I would die on that wall, except for the fact that I've been dying on that wall for 6 years and no one has picked it up with me, so I'm
Well, I'm
not
with
ready,
you.
I'm not ready to die on the wall, because I've been trying to get them
Well,
done,
if
so.
you don't have a use in common driveway, you have to have flag lots.
Well, I'm saying dedicated road, just build a dedicated flipping road. If you're gonna do it, make it a road, but then the county doesn't wanna maintain it. What is it, 500, what is, $2,000 per 500 linear feet? Is that the number, the budget for the county?
Oh, for a road.
I think
Maintenance?
it's somewhere in that vicinity, yeah.
Yeah, I think the number that was quoted to me was $2,000 per 500 linear feet is what it costs the county to maintain, plow, and draw, whatever, a road. That is a number,
That is a big number.
but, okay, all right, it's moving on.
All right. I think, well, we've lost Janice. Do we have it in us to get through the last two, which are ag recommendations, and then we can pause?
Yes,
and-
ma'am.
jump
it.
into housing at the next time.
Finish the page.
Please.
All right. So then we have, so it sounds like we're keeping the recommendation to strengthen the rural design standards with a couple of additional notes about things to look into. Maintain and do not increase the allowable number of principal permitted or conditional uses on remaining portions. Keep. Hearing no opposition, we'll keep that one. And then the last one here relates to construction costs and permitting. So explore the causes of high construction costs for new agricultural buildings, particularly as they relate to permitting requirements, and identify potential remedies to address these challenges. As far as regulatory things go, I'm not quite sure. I mean, we'd have to do that exploration to figure out whether there are regulatory tie-ins here
Well, I
or
know
not.
one of the things like the Amish complained about was that, you know, they've been building buildings the same way for hundreds of years. And now Carroll County says that's not good enough, you gotta make it heavier. And they're like almost dumbfounded by it. And I know a guy that's built a lot of ag buildings, our code, I don't know if that's a state code.
So we get our permitting code specifically from, which is chapter 170. We pull that specifically from the International Building Code. The International Building Code is adopted by the state of Maryland.
Yeah.
So that's where things such as like the sprinkler requirements that we hear a lot about come from, load bearing, things like that. They're pulled directly from the International Building Code, which we adopt.
Yeah.
Do we have to adopt it? Or is it,
State
do we
of
just,
Maryland usually says we do.
It's a state mandate.
so the state mandates that we sprinkle every building, or every
Above a certain
dwelling?
square footage
Yeah.
and with certain electrical requirements.
Because it's amazing, our wind load in Carroll County is way more than Pennsylvania. I have no idea why. Because when they, trust me, I mean, well, you go to build a building, the builders are normally look at the plans and they're like, their eyes get big because the costs go up so much. It's normally, you know, like NRCS, when they design a building, they go by the highest state standards, and their buildings are ridiculous what they cost. But even to meet the county requirements, it's still pretty eye-opening. Well, wind plus, because it's like, you know,
Plus
we're
load.
30-pound snow load.
Plus
Well,
load,
30-pound
yeah.
snow load
The load.
goes all the way up through Pennsylvania too. But I think it's because we tend to get more, you know, nor'easters and stuff like that. But
So we can keep this in here and explore whether there are,
yeah, if there's,
Alternatives.
I think, you know, I think a lot of that was brought up because of what some of the Amish have said, definitely, that, and I would agree, it's like, I've never seen, you know, I've seen the barns burned down, I haven't seen too many of them blow down or fall down. Snow load, because I mean, they normally, I guess it's because there's no standards in log frame buildings, you know, without having stress tests and all that kind of stuff on all the lumber, when they typically use hand-cut lumber or sawmill cut lumber to build. I don't know if that's what it is, but I know the ones I've talked to would like an explanation why their building standards they've used for hundreds of years are not good enough for Carroll County, but
Well, with a lot of it too, with IBC, a lot of it has to do with newer materials, things like that. That's where a lot of the sprinkler and stuff comes in, because a new house will go up significantly faster than an old house, because you're dealing with, you know, TGI joists and all that stuff, which are just sawdust and glue put together. Same thing with new fabrics, new materials, all that stuff. I mean, it just, the level to which something will burn down that's relatively new. But if you think that's bad, if you have like a building or something that has to fall under like the FM requirements, factory mutual, I mean, that is IBC on steroids, crazily enough.
yeah, maybe we should give them ideas. I have sprinklers in our cow barns next.
Okay, so would you like to keep this one in and see if there are alternatives to consider?
For the cows, right? There you go.
Sorry, we were chatting.
Yeah,
All right, so we'll keep this one in,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I think more so for maybe help figure out why exactly, as compared to other states anyway, close by just,
Okay.
so we can say we did it.
All right, so we'll pause here. We've gotten through the ag-related ones. We have about another page worth of housing-related ones that we'll pick up with at the next meeting. Just one thing I wanted to mention to you, at some point, I do want to sort of pause a little bit and go over the planning principles with you again. I know I had introduced them a little while ago, but particularly given the recent legislation that passed about incorporating the planning principles as elements of your plan, it would be good to just understand the implications of that. I've looked through them, and in a lot of cases, existing language related to the various elements have kind of been folded into those 8 planning principles. So there's not a whole lot that's completely new. There are a few things that I want to put on your radar screen. And then we can talk about whether we want to kind of reorient how we organize the plan or how we address these 8 planning principles when it's all said and done. So just giving you a heads up, at some point, we'll kind of pivot a little bit, just because I think it would be helpful to us to know how you want to incorporate those while we're building this thing.
good,
All righty, thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Smack your gavel.
This is for the back.
Like it.